Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Joe Kuzma, and since I am here by my lonesome one more time this week, I guess I'm going to kick over the free agent stuff until next week when I can get Brian to chime in on some of this. Unfortunately, that means you get to hear me talk about quarterbacks a little bit more, but I got a lot of personal rants with that, and at least in this case, me and Brian won't be talking over each other. I'm hoping to get him to run a solo pod here with some of his quarterback thoughts as well, but he had already kind of opened the gates to talking about this in the previous episode and had mentioned our position kind of pretty much all along, which I'll be getting to here in a few moments. Again, I get annoyed sometimes. You get some folks out there, anybody can put anything out on the internet, and you got more stuff. You got the Juju Smith-Schuster stuff, and I think I mentioned some of this on the previous episode, but now people are talking about a comment he made about the Cowboys facilities being nice. Look, Juju, they were showing Juju on Instagram packing up, moving truck. He's going back home. He's going to California. A lot of these guys have apartments. They don't live in the immediate Pittsburgh area. Some guys do. They transfer their whole lives over. Maybe they have multiple contracts and they end up making a life and nesting right there in Western Pennsylvania. Troy Polamalu comes to mind. Hines Ward has come to mind. Ben Roethlisberger definitely is a pillar of the community. So you've got guys like that, and then you got guys who have homes all over the place. I mean, you look over Rod Woodson's originally from the Oakland, California area. So it doesn't mean that they don't make appearances, they don't come back, they go back and forth. I see so much speculation with that. It's like anything that gets posted on the internet anymore. Now, I think Juju could be teasing a little bit that he wants paid. You know, let's face it. He came out of the gates as one of the youngest player in the NFL, and had some tremendous seasons, was the Steelers MVP, which apparently PO'd Antonio Brown and set him off, if you remember all that. Now, injuries kind of sidetracked him over the last couple of seasons, and I think last free agency period, last season, he was disappointed. I mean, think about it. You put yourself in his shoes, you're thinking, hey, I should be one of the top names that are coming out of here as a free agent, and maybe I can make some money because this doesn't last forever. And he's a smart young man. He's been able to market himself with Pizza Hut commercials and stuff like that, get some extra scratch on the side. Good for him. And it's like, you know, you got to remember, a lot of the football is the sport, but business is a very much so underlying cause of like a majority of the things that go on within the context of football, all the things that happen off the field and outside of the gridiron. And this is just another one of those things. And of course, you know, he has agents and stuff to take care of this. They probably book the moving trucks. They try and make life as easy as possible. I've had several agents on the show over the years, and, you know, it's a tough time of year to get to talk to them, but maybe sometime this summer, after all the free agency and draft and everything dies down, because don't forget, they're representing all the new players that are coming into the NFL as well. Maybe get another agent or two on the program and talk about the process, talk about collective bargaining and all these different things that have changed not only over the years, but if they can even get dinner for these guys, you know what I mean? The agents for their players, if they can get a chef or they do whatever to make their life simpler and just focus on football, it's what they do. That's why I find it so preposterous when people make fun of like Juju or something and are like, oh, the guy's on TikTok or he's playing a video game or whatever. It's like, yeah, this is in his leisure time. Just like, you know, you or I get done with work, come home. A lot of people go to the fridge, crack open a beer and sit on the couch. Well, he's not doing that because he's an athlete and, you know, he's working out every day for God knows probably how many hours a day each week. You know, you get a rest day in there somewhere. You just can't do it nonstop, but still, they're machines. So when he's talking about the Dallas Cowboys locker room and facilities, I'm like, well, he said something about the Steelers ones being wooden And I'm like, the Steelers locker room is very nice at Heinz Field. I've been in the locker room there, and I've actually been in the locker room at Cowboys Stadium as well, which is a very nice place, but they're very similarly set up. You got a bunch of stalls, so you could put your stuff in there. If you're a player, you hang it up. You got the little lock box at the top, maybe at the bottom where the seat lifts up, or Steelers case, they got chairs and stuff too. And it's kind of a wide open area, so your coaches could come in and speak with you. And then there's like a giant shower area and bathroom, and then that's about what it amounts to it. And Pittsburgh has the equipment manager stuff connected to it too. I can't remember if the Cowboys did as well, but they're both very nice facilities. They're newer stadiums. I believe Juju was talking about the Cowboys, of course, have excuse me, have their training facility in Cowboys. Juju's from California. He's obviously seen this, and it's state of the art. I believe they've actually just revamped it within the last few years as well. He's comparing to St. Vincent College. St. Vincent College, I believe, 50-some years of the Steelers going there, they've invested some money into some of the facilities and stuff, but it is very much, you hear from any of the old players that we've talked to, even current ones, it is straight up like you go from USC like Juju did, and you're at training camp at St. Vincent College. There's no comparison there. And every little soundbite these guys have is going to be taken out of context. Don't hold it against him. Most of you, if you went from USC or like an Ohio State or an Alabama or some real big college program to doing training camp at tiny St. Vincent College, where they wall you off from everything. This isn't like other teams where they put you up in a hotel and everything like that for training camp. No siree. This is like the old school. Now, they've had the opportunity the last couple years because of the pandemic where they haven't been at St. Vincent's either, and they have been at Heinz Field. And I know some teams, they do training camp. They have facilities. The Bengals, for example, have their facilities right there at Paul Brown Stadium. Other teams do not. Obviously, the Cowboys aren't even in the same state. Cleveland Browns are off location. They have a whole other campus and whatnot, too, that's custom built for them. So everybody does something different. The Kansas City Chiefs also go to a small college. It's about an hour away from Kansas City, from those city limits. I think it's St. Joe's or St. Joseph's, actually. About the same size as a St. Vincent. Ironic, I think, that they're both saints there, too, my namesake, right? So anyway, and of course the Chiefs got to practice there this year, and the Steelers did not for whatever stupid reasons. It didn't hold up to the NFL's protocol, if you remember all that. People have short-term memories. I've been talking about this a lot, and I see things that are out here now that are incredible amounts of like misinformation and just bad takes. I presume that the folks putting them out there aren't privy to how things operate. And I'm talking about general managers. I'm talking about Kevin Colbert. And forgive me if I'm a broken record and I brought this up prior, but I had to bring it up again because I continue to keep seeing it. General managers, their job is from draft to draft. It's not from, the season to the season, end of season, even though Mike Tomlin doesn't get a break. But when you hire and fire coaches, their job begins now, right? They're involved in all these other processes, but they coach through the season. If they have a bad season, they get fired at the end of that season. And teams that are, perennial dumpster fires, Jacksonville, New York Giants, sadly, the Mara family, and, they have the legacy or the kind of NFL royalty type name like the Rooneys do, and they have just been, just a nightmare for the last decade or so. And aside from that, and I'm not going to get into some of the other storylines that are going on, I'm trying to stick with just general managers here, but you see some of the teams that hire their general managers and then they get their coach in place now, and now they're going to probably get the coach and the quarterback go together, but they're firing these general managers at the end of a bad season, and the general managers are already behind the proverbial 8 ball, because really someone like Kevin Colbert Or you had Ozzie Newsome, who kicked it over to, is it DaCosta? Is that the right name I'm thinking of? Over in Baltimore. This is typically draft to draft. So they draft, and then that's it. They're done, because right at the end of this draft, they're already working on the next college class that's coming out, the next crop of players. And they're going to start identifying people. They're going to be watching film from the previous year. They're going to be watching these players throughout the college season, and that's their job. Their job, that supersedes anything really that's even going on in the Steelers building at the time. The Steelers lose on Sunday. They might hear about it. They're probably traveling back from wherever they just were at the night before in some college town, trying to ID some players that might be a fit for the Steelers. And this goes on. So this calendar year here, unless you're a dumpster fire team, typically the general managers, there aren't many who get to leave on their own terms. So that's why I think this is a little bit out of the norm. But people are like, oh, Kevin Colbert should step down before the draft. Why are they doing this? This is so... No, you know what? I had this from the Steelers Digest from last year. And I'm going to read this. This is Teresa Varley, who's an assistant editor there. You've seen her name on social media working with the Steelers. And she wrote, a couple of years ago, General Manager Kevin Colbert asked Steelers President Art Rooney II if it would be okay if he began operating on a series of one-year contracts. Not looking to free himself up to seek a more lucrative agreement with a different team. Colbert said his reason was he had reached an age when he was closer to the end of his career than the beginning of it, and doing things one a year by year basis made sense where he was in his career. So he's been doing these 1 year deals the whole time, and it's kind of like, we're going to let you know. I'm going to let you know. And he let them know in advance. So now they're going to be doing this process. It's more than likely an internal hire. And I know I've said some of these things before, but they go hand in hand with the whole crying about a quarterback thing, which... forgive me if I'm long-winded and this just continues and continues and continues to drone on. But I know we've got a few weeks for free agency. We know now that Jimmy Garoppolo and the 49ers are out of it. And there's going to be all of that discussion and talk because 49ers will try and get something out of this deal, obviously. They still have Garoppolo for a year, but unlike most of the situations in the NFL, they drop him. It's not going to cost them much of anything. And there's speculation. Who's the next quarterback for the Steelers? And I've been sitting here the whole time, as Brian alluded to in the last episode, and we've been talking about it. We've been talking about it since the previous offseason. Well, if Ben doesn't return, they drafted Mason Rudolph, and all of a sudden you say that name and it like triggers people. Like I equate this to the same thing that happened with Alex Highsmith this whole offseason. Everyone kept saying, and during the draft, people were trying, and they're still trying to mock edge rushers to the Steelers. I just saw one the other day, and I'm like, holy smokes. Like, do you not realize TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith, how well that they're doing here? And I think I'll leave that for another day. But if you looked up the statistics for a one Alex Highsmith, which I may have already mentioned this previously as well, but Alex Highsmith has 6 sacks this season, 74 tackles, 15 tackles for loss, of 15 quarterback hits. 14 of those 15 tackles for loss, all but 1 tackle for loss. All the quarterback hits, 15, the 14 tackles for loss, 15 quarterback hits, and the 6 sacks all came when they decided to sit Melvin Ingram on the sideline. He had his hissy fit because he didn't get enough playing time against Seattle Seahawks in Week 6. The guy was on. Highsmith has been on fire, and Ingram went on to have like 2 half sacks and 10 tackles in 9 games with Kansas City. Yeah, okay, he had a strip whatever in the playoffs and that stuff. You know, a broken clock is right twice a day. I'll take the guy who's consistently doing stuff for me. And people are going to say, well, he didn't. After Ingram left, well, the Steelers rush this and that. And it's like, yeah, well, look who else. Watt missed time, and all these other players were hurt. Joe Hayden was out for all that. Come on. There's a lot of things there. You don't think Joe Hayden helps so they don't get around the edge there? I mean, come on. Come on now. So, I mean, James Pierre, we fall in love this time of year with certain draft pick ideas. And, of course, in the draft and in camp, who's the guy that they found that could have been drafted but wasn't? And they more than likely weren't because 32 teams thought this player doesn't have it. There's always exceptions to that. And you're seeing that right now a whole bunch of things that are bouncing around here. I'm going to get back to my free agent quarterbacks and my other spiel there, but the Senior Bowl and Kevin Colbert, oh, we need new blood, oh, this and that. Oh, look, Malik Willis, Liberty. You've got like Kenny Pickett and Matt Corral and who else is down there? Sam Howell. I'm trying to think. Actually, maybe was Corral not there. I forget which one of them got hurt, but you got all the young quarterbacks that are down there. And, 5 or 6 of them, and it becomes a headline as soon as Kevin Colbert or Brandon Hunt is head scout, or Mike Tomlin. Mike Tomlin talked to Malik Willis. Oh, my God. The Steelers are really, really interested. Come on, man. It's the Senior Bowl. They interview, they talk to 60 players while they're down there. It might be getting a little facetious there, but you get the idea. They're going to talk to every quarterback. Kenny Pickett said he would love to stay in Pittsburgh. Well, that means he's going to be a Steeler right away. I don't know. You look at some of the teams that might be needing quarterbacks coming up. Some of the coaching changes, they don't like the quarterbacks that they have. Some of the new general managers, they don't like the staff that's in place. They're going to put their system in place for 8 of these teams that are going through change now. And the Steelers got to compete with that. Now, some of them, like the Jaguars, already got Trevor Lawrence. I don't think you're doing much change on a guy that's only played 1 year so far in the NFL. However, it's just kind of nonsensical to me. All the speculation and I get it. You're trying to drive traffic to your media platforms, and there's not much else to talk about right now. But it's also at the same time, it's like, man, people take some of this for face value. They take it as a fact. Oh, they're definitely interested in this guy. It's like, I understand Ben Roethlisberger came from the MAC. But we've got so many arguments against everyone. You got a quarterback from UNC. You got the Kenny Pickett from Pitt, who played in a weaker ACC this season. Malik Willis went to Liberty. Not that I love my smaller college guys, my 1AAs and everything else. But I mean, there's a lot of speculation, and with the track record of how quarterbacks come out and how many of them actually have success, I like to pump my brakes on all of that. And part of my reasoning for saying some of this too is, I don't believe, even if you might twist my arm into like Najee Harris last year. I was so vehemently against drafting a running back with the first round pick. You might get me to do it with quarterback. It all depends on how free agency shakes out. And the Steelers got some money to gamble with here. They've got to do some in-house stuff as well. Those are the things that we need to talk about still in a future episode. But as far as just the quarterback aspect of this, I went through, the previous week, and I mentioned all of the guys who aren't available, and you have to trade draft picks for them. You probably have to take on a large salary, which eats up your salary cap. So now you don't have the draft to build. Not that the Steelers are missing some picks here this year already based on previous trades that they had made. And so they don't have a whole lot of draft capital to just give away unless they mortgage more of their future, like the Rams, for example, who don't have a draft for the next 3 years. And if you don't have the money because you're taking on an Aaron Rodgers contract, or let's say Deshaun Watson gets a clean bill, and then now he could be traded, he's going to play in the NFL this season, and you're taking on his cap hits of 30-some mil, you don't have any money left. You still got to do a Minkah Fitzpatrick deal that can be spread out over, the following seasons and whatnot. We know how all these bonuses and things work, and then there's restructures, kick it forward. Now there's void years in the contracts that the Steelers started using last offseason. So, I mean, there's different ways to get around some of the stuff with the salary cap. It'll eventually catch up to you. And, that's what happened to the Steelers this past year when COVID knocked all of the revenues down for the NFL. And instead of, having this salary cap that we were discussing going up, what was it originally? It was estimated as going up to around 210 from 198. Instead, it went from 198 to 182, and you hardly were able to keep anyone. And then there's also some padded years. The reason they don't have more cap room is because of deals they did with Juju Smith-Schuster, a 1-year deal that has 2-3 void years in it where they're still paying them maybe at least 6 figures, $750,000 or whatever prorated bonus. So, I mean, and that's not the end of the world when we're talking about NFL money, but still, these are the things you got to do with constructing your roster. So, as far as the guys at the Senior Bowl, I mean, the Steelers are going to show interest in all of these quarterbacks because That's what they need to do. They just lost a guy that's going to be going into the Hall of Fame first ballot. That's not to say that the guys that are already on the roster are necessarily a bad fit. And that's what me and Brian were saying. Wouldn't you much rather roll with Mason Rudolph or Dwayne Haskins? And then you could build the offensive line with free agency in the draft. Maybe you can get some depth pieces, defensive line. I see some needs for some different things that I don't think are needs. And the reason I believe some of that, if they could get like Ahkello Witherspoon to come back, corners set. Even if Joe Hayden goes off into retirement at 33 years old, even if they bring him back, you still need something there because Joe has never been a full season guy. He gets banged up here or there. Missed 5 games last year. We'll see. Terrell Edmunds is a free agent. I've been a defender of him as I had been Bud Dupree for many years. I don't think there's any problem with Edmunds for what he's asked to do with the Steelers. If they have somebody else that's suitable to step in or they find, and let's say Edmunds gets a big deal, whatever. But they could lock down the secondary. Then you're not drafting for secondary. I don't think any of the middle linebackers are going anywhere. They're still going to see if just because Devin Bush hasn't gotten a 5th-year option, he's still under the 4th year of his rookie contract. Joe Schobert has a nice price tag on him headed forward, but let's see how much of this was affected by losing like Tyson Alualu, losing Stephon Tuitt. If those two, one or both of those two are back, if both are back, that's even better. They drafted Isaiah Loudermilk. They got somebody young. You never know what's going to go on with some of the other free agents. Chris Wormley, who was supposed to be a rotational guy, became the starter. Wasn't too bad. But at points, he was hurt or on the COVID list. They went over to Isaiah Buggs, who didn't finish the season on the team. Carlos Davis was on, off, hurt, and whatnot. So they don't even know if some of the guys they had in reserve that they were planning on. You lost your starters, then you lost your reserve guys, and you're plucking people off the practice squad or off of other people's practice squads like Montravius Adams. And that affects the middle linebackers. So you got the offensive linemen that are going straight up the field, and they're getting a hat on a smaller guy, which is a mismatch, right? That's what you want. You want your offensive linemen on the linebackers. The defensive linemen weren't quite always doing their job, but at the same time, TJ Watt has the season for the ages, and I just mentioned Alex Highsmith's stats, so I don't know that the Steelers go like full blast all in drafting free agency on defensive players. I think they got spots they fill in. I think there's some of their own in-house signings that they do, whether it irritates people or not. And I know there's going to be a lot of emotion and feelings about all of these positions. Devin Bush sucks and this and that. I don't think they're ready to just move on from that right now. And don't forget, they just drafted Buddy Johnson and stuff like that. So I'm talking a little more off-season plans because this all affects whether or not they would take a quarterback. And it kind of opens them up in a few spots. I don't think they would take a wide receiver with pick 20 overall in the first round. It's usually not the Steelers' style. When's the last one? Santonio Holmes, and before that, Plaxico Burress. It's just usually they find quality receivers in the second, third, even fourth rounds. You have so the quarterback argument goes to if you go and you get a rookie, and how much time is that rookie getting? When then maybe you're rolling with Rudolph and Haskins. And I say Rudolph and Haskins, but I'm like 70-30 on it being Rudolph, unless he completely screws up training camp. That's the reason they drafted him in 2018. In the third round, the first quarterback taken outside the first round of that draft. He was the 6th overall quarterback taken in that draft. I see names like Malik Willis thrown around. Well, if they could get him in the second round, if they get him in the third round. I've seen actually other names show up in these conversations too, and I'll never forget there's so many from the past where people were talking about whether or not they could be linked to the Steelers. Maybe they're a second round pick, and these guys either go in the 6th or they're undrafted. There's a lot of hype this time of year around surrounding a lot of these players. It's exciting. You want to see the men that did well in college, the young men, grow into being pro players, but the odds are not in their favor. It's like the Hunger Games. May the odds be forever in your favor. So if the Steelers end up with drafting someone, I at this point, I'd be okay with it, but it depends on what's on the board. Because if you have like the top center that's coming out of Iowa, and you can lock that position down for the next decade. That's only going to help whoever the quarterback is. I don't care if it's one of these guys that I think's a bum and they end up naming anyway. So let's talk about some of these bums. I was mentioning Jimmy Garoppolo earlier, and San Francisco just straight up cuts him. It would only be a $1.4 million dead cap. They would save $25.5 million. It's what makes him the likely candidate after they just unloaded everything to go and get Trey Lance, who we don't know who Trey Lance is either. Maybe they found out. Maybe they've been able to operate with him a little bit. He got to play a little bit this season. They obviously liked him a lot coming out of college. I always wonder about that too, because he didn't have a full college season. Now he hasn't had a pro season. He hasn't really played in 2 years, a full season. You never know. It could backfire. The grass is always greener type scenario. A lot of people like Jimmy just because, hey, he got the NFC title game twice, and he used to be Tom Brady's backup. He played for Belichick. He played for Kyle Shanahan, and doesn't have a whole lot to show for it, to be completely honest. He only attempted 94 passes when he was in New England. 94 passes. He completed 63 passes, and he gets traded to San Francisco for $137.5 million. You're going to hear me mention this millions of times over because that's a lot of money. And you're going to go and you're going to get Jimmy Garoppolo, and he has a base salary this season of about $24.2 million. He's going to have a roster bonus too, so that's why his cap savings is at 25.5. Depending on when these some of these bonuses kick in as well, depends on what it costs for the next team. But then you're going to have to extend the guy and probably pay him $30 million a year for some production that I'm not so certain that you want necessarily. I mean, he played 6 games his first season there, 3 games the next season. You got 9 games out of this guy in 2 years for $137.5 million. Let me say that again. 9 games out of 32, because they're 16-game seasons up until last season. Played a full season in 2019. Completed a lot of his passes. It says 69.1. He almost threw for 4,000 yards, but he hasn't in any one season. 27 touchdowns to 13 interceptions. He only played 6 games last year. Misses 10. And this is what has kind of held the 49ers back, has been his health. Maybe they still roll with him and keep the rookie behind him for a little bit. Maybe it's Brett Favre and, Aaron Rodgers. And I got to bring up Aaron Rodgers later. And even when these guys start their first seasons, they're not necessarily a finished product. They're not all pros. They're not Pro Bowl guys. In fact, most of them stink, to be completely honest. Whether they pick it up the following years, just look at Josh Allen, how he's matured. And you got to have some patience. And that's one of the things I'm going to say is like anybody you have, if it's Rudolph, if it ends up being Haskins that you're continuing to throw in there, Rudolph fails. You got a backup plan with Haskins, former first-round pick, 17th overall a few years ago by the now Washington Commanders. I don't know how I feel about that name. Ask me about it later. I always think the generic branding and stuff that comes out with these name things is exactly it, generic. So, but anyways, you got Haskins, and neither of them have been in the 40-50 starts conversation, so it's really unfair to say how good or bad they are at this point. When you talk about somebody like Garoppolo, who had 45 starts here with San Francisco, he completes a lot of his passes. He does. He's an accurate quarterback, except for when he turns the ball over. And this past season, the 2 full seasons that he had, it's not terrible. I mean, he missed 2 games last year, played in 15, completed 68.3 of his passes, 38-10, 20 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. That could be a lot better. It's not necessarily very good. 20-12, that's, 12 isn't a high amount, but then again, this is a team, they like to pound the rock. 20 touchdowns isn't a whole lot either. I don't know how that improves the Steelers. And this is Kyle Shanahan and his offense. Don't forget that. And we mentioned this on the last show. George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, guys like that. And I'm not going to harp on just Jimmy here because I got a lot of other guys I need to cover, and I've mentioned him quite a bit. It's a veteran guy with a lot of experience. If he becomes the Steelers quarterback, I'll have to accept the judgment of the Steelers, but you got to hope that works with Matt Canada and company. And you got to hope. I don't know. I really don't know how I would necessarily feel about that. If you're paying them a lot of money, that's the problem I have, is giving up draft picks for money. The Steelers need an offensive line. Jimmy G has a decent offensive line, and you still see with a head coach, a very offensive-minded head coach, still not really putting up the large numbers. The postseason's the thing that's always bothered me the most with him, and you can go back to the last episode where I spoke about that, or the previous one, but his postseason numbers, very few, up until this past one where he threw 2 touchdowns against the Rams, he'd only thrown 2 touchdowns the entire postseason to 5 interceptions and has had terrible completion rates, et cetera, et cetera. It's just not something that I'm very interested in looking at. So who else as far as the free agents? Well, let's talk about, are these free agents really an upgrade over Mason Rudolph or over Dwayne Haskins? And like I said, I'm 70-30 on this. I think Mason Rudolph, you look at 2019, I've mentioned many times who he played with. James Conner missed like 6 games that season. Juju missed a lot of time. Deontay Johnson got knocked out of games. You had Marquise Pouncey even get suspended for the Myles Garrett incident. You had this kid come in the second year. He's behind Ben Roethlisberger. Ben Roethlisberger is the guy you're prepared to roll with the whole season. You go into halftime against the Seahawks in week 2, your home opener. Hey, Mason, suit up. And now he's the guy. Then he gets like legit knocked out, stretchered out of Heinz Field after Earl Thomas hits him 3 weeks later. He has to recover from that. He's seeing a little bit of ghost. Still nothing, in my opinion, that's absolutely terrible about what he put up. People complain about Randy Fichtner. They complain about Benny Snell football. They complain about Dante Moncrief. These are all things that happened in 2019. You had Kareth White. You had Tony Brooks-James. You had Trey Edmonds in the backfield. You had Johnny Holton. Who else am I missing? Deion Kane, who they snagged off of, I think the Colts might have had him. Somebody had him on their practice squad. Tevin Jones, he plays in a game and drops passes and is immediately cut the next day. Somebody that they had on their practice squad for like 2-3 years, and they had been trying to develop as a receiver, and he just blew it big time on the big stage. Mason, I'm sorry, for some reason coughing here. I may need a cough drop. Sorry about that. 62.5 completed passes, or 62.2. in 2019 with that type of cast. 13 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. 4 of those interceptions on the short week. Primetime game at Cleveland. I will bring that up all the time because then that means the rest of his games, he only threw 5 interceptions playing in 10 games in 2019. Well, 9 games. 9 other games. That's pretty darn good, and we're talking about, other people like Jimmy G here. How about giving him a chance? He's had 10 starts. He's appeared in 17 games. That includes some kneel downs where he just comes in and touches the ball a couple of times. He was sacked 15 times in those appearances. I think that's the biggest metric that I have to put out there for a lot of folks, is that he doesn't take a lot of sacks. You talk about him being, he's immobile, he's a pocket guy, he's a statue. They need to get a mobile guy. And we're having this discussion too. Does mobile mean Malik Willis, like somebody that's like a Lamar Jackson? It's almost like a hybrid running back, or is mobile just someone who extends plays like Ben used to, like Russell Wilson does? I don't know. Patrick Mahomes, he goes all over the place, and then you see that doesn't always work. Josh Allen, I get it. You got some guys you have to compete with there. Dwayne Haskins isn't that guy either. In fact, Mason Rudolph had a faster 40 time at his combine and pro days than Dwayne Haskins did. Now, let that one sink in as far as athleticism and whatnot is concerned. And I don't know, speed with quarterbacks, I kind of do an eye roll to begin with. But we're in these conversations, These are the things that are happening, and these are the things that are being brought up around the league. You have 16 appearances and 13 starts for Dwayne Haskins. He's had some more attempts, 12 touchdowns to 14 interceptions. But the big number for me, again, is 49 sacks. And Washington had Moses. They used to have the one all-pro tackle there as well. So they didn't necessarily have just bums on their offensive line. And as long as I'm not conflating my seasons here, which I don't believe I am, there's opportunity there. And it's just a young, I think, raw quarterback who the game speeds up, and they haven't caught up to it, if they catch up to it. So that's why I have Haskins definitely as the guy that's been in the system longer. Will he compete? Yes, he will. He will compete. Everyone's going to complain come preseason if it's these two guys and only these two guys, and they don't go, why didn't they go after this free agent or whatever else? And it might work somewhere else. That was our argument against drafting Mac Jones last year. That's a good fit for Mac Jones. Mac Jones in the Steelers offense last year in place of Ben Roethlisberger, they win like 3 games and they're looking at drafting the next quarterback maybe. It's just sometimes it's the fit. Like some of these careers, I read a good quote this morning actually. Somebody said some of these careers end the day on draft day. And that's very true depending on what organization they go to, what system, what fit, everything like that. So I've got more to chew off on why I say they should roll with Rudolph and Haskins, but I really got to wait and get through some of the free agent stuff. I already tipped the cap to some of it, but you're not blowing a draft pick here on a player that's probably a quarterback that's not going to play this season. I don't think that they would force a rookie quarterback into action, they being Mike Tomlin and his staff, especially when you've got 2 guys who have some starting experience. I would like to see a full season, some patience, a full season with Mason Rudolph, or albeit Dwayne Haskins, same situation. But again, Rudolph's the guy that's there first. Rudolph's the guy, hey, Malik Willis, you can get him maybe in the 3rd round. Here's Mason Rudolph in the 3rd round. Now, I know they're not the same player, potentially. Different athletic profiles. So I'm bringing Willis up because just from him being at Liberty, maybe he's a guy that slips. I see people say these things. I don't necessarily believe that. We could have 4 quarterbacks go in the 1st round. We could have them go before pick 20 again. It's very, very likely. And just so Rudolph was in that conversation of 1st-round guys and fell to the 3rd round, and the Steelers leapfrogged the Bengals. How about that for some trivia or some history? Bengals had the next 2 picks after the Seahawks, and the Steelers trade with the Seahawks to get in front of the Bengals and take Mason Rudolph because they felt the Bengals might be interested in picking up a quarterback. If Rudolph goes there, some of you are going to be laughing because you're thinking maybe the Bengals wouldn't be in the Super Bowl, this, that, and the other thing. We really don't know how that turned. How does that change the NFL and everything that happens from that point forward and where Joe Burrow goes? It's some interesting stuff. But again, it's like we want a guy that has 1st-round grades on him, and you want to get him in the mid-rounds, and here's one of them. But the biggest thing is right now we got free agency around the corner. And I've already talked about Jimmy G. Let's talk about somebody else that comes up a lot. Marcus Mariota. Last 2 years spent with the Las Vegas Raiders. Didn't have like a big market, so he's a backup. You see him come in. He attempted what? Got in one game and attempted 28 passes in 2020. Completed 17 of 28, 60.7, 226 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. Scampers around a little bit here or there. They don't even have the rushing put in with the same thing, but it's been a gimmick player. 9 carries, 88 yards, and a touchdown rushing. 13, 87, 1 yard or 1 touchdown in 2021, and they've installed that. They installed that package more or less around the goal line, but they don't let him throw the ball. This is the main point. He had 2 pass attempts this past season. He appeared in 10 games and threw the ball twice. Well, does that sound any bells and whistles or alarms? Let's go back to when he was a starter in Tennessee. His last real, true, kind of full season, 2018. He has a high completion percentage in this particular season. Is 68.9, only 2,528 yards on 331 attempts. So he didn't throw the ball a whole lot. This is Arthur Smith, by the way, as his OC. So another very quality offensive mind in the NFL. And he doesn't succeed in this system much. 11 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. But you have 2019, right before he gets benched for Ryan Tannehill. He attempts 160 passes. His completion percentage dips below 60%. That's your minimum benchmark. 7 touchdowns to 2 interceptions. Here's the problem. Marcus Mariota, for being all the more mobile he is, took 42 sacks in those 14 appearances in 2018, 42, and then 25 the following season. So in fewer, we've got some quick math, 491 pass attempts. This guy was sacked 67 times. My goodness. I mean, Dwayne Haskins has a worse figure than that, but you can see how Mariota, for even being as mobile as he is. Now, here's the other big problem with that. You've got 18 touchdowns over those 500 attempts, we'll call it. You got 18 touchdowns to 10 interceptions, 67 sacks. That's not so good. You also have, where's it at here? 9 fumbles and another 3. 12 fumbles, a dozen fumbles on those. So you get sacked 67 times, you fumble the ball 12 times, and you give away, 8 or 10 interceptions. The guy turning the ball over. That's the reason he doesn't have a job. Can you fix ball security? I don't know. His rookie season, he fumbled the ball 10 times and then followed it up his sophomore campaign, fumbling it 10 times more. And during that process of entering the NFL, 19 touchdowns to 10 interceptions, 26-9 in his best season that he had. That was his second year. He was 8-7 as a starting quarterback. Still was giving the ball up, and that's the reason they lost some of those games. And that was the fewest times he was sacked. He was doing okay. But, man, that 42 and then the 25 in only 7 games, boy, does that really, really, really stand out. I mean, 42 is a lot if you played a full 16-game schedule. You're in the upper echelon there. So Mariota, somebody was mentioning floating 1 year, 14, 16 million. Why? Why do you want him to take reps from players that need it? Let's face it, the reason most of people have the opinion with Mason Rudolph that they do is that he hasn't won some games that maybe he should have. A lot of people say, well, he got benched for Duck Hodges. Well, no, he was in concussion protocol the first time. As soon as he came out of that, he wins 3 games in a row. What was it? The Dolphins, the Colts, and the Rams. And, of course, some people say, yeah, the defense. You got Minka Fitzpatrick making these plays and a backup quarterback. Yeah, okay. But they win, and people are happy at that point. But they also forget that against San Francisco in week 3, James Conner fumbles around the 20-yard line, and that gives up the game-winning touchdown. The Steelers had that already under wraps. You forget Mason gets injured, gets knocked out of that Ravens game. Duck Hodges comes in, and they lose that game in overtime when Juju fumbles. And they're deep in it was like a chip shot, 30-some yarder for Justin Tucker. He just had to enter the field and knock it through the uprights and game over. And the Steelers lose there, and they start the season weak, like 1-4. They beat the Bengals in week 4. So these are things you got to think of. And then they go on a streak. And yes, he gets benched at Cincinnati at halftime because he's still seeing ghosts from Myles Garrett hitting him in the head. And really, I wish he would have pulled him from that. Those are the games that ruin young quarterbacks. Like that game in Cleveland, short week, little preparation, on the road, losing the players you play with. You lose all your starters practically. And then who are you throwing the ball to? And now you're trying to force plays and you're giving up interceptions and it's a mess. And those are the plays that then the next week it's in your head. And I think Mike Tomlin did more of a favor for Mason Rudolph than he did even just the team, just from a development standpoint in the future of the Steelers franchise and not mentally wrecking. Some coaches would have just left him out there and maybe they lose against the Bengals too. And then it just starts perpetually rolling downhill. But you get Duck in there. He completes a nice – you have a play where James Washington beats his corner, gets wide open, and goes like 60 yards down the field. And that's the only thing that happens when Hodges come in there. Hodges solidly beats the Browns. He has defensive help with Kyler Murray and the Cardinals. They get a game there. You get towards the end of the season, and he throws 6 picks in the final 3 games. They lose to Buffalo on a Sunday night game that was flexed into prime time. That was to see who could be the top dog there and make the postseason. They were both in contention. But then you get to the Jets game, and he gets benched. Mason comes in. Mason does decent, but into the third quarter ends up breaking his collarbone. So then they lose that game. They're practically out of the playoffs. They have to beat the Ravens. They can't even beat the Ravens backups at this point because they're playing with like a preseason team themselves. So these are the things that happen. And I don't see where adding a Marcus Mariota to this equation necessarily changes what that looks like. We get a lot of people talking about, and by the way, Mariota's had 61 starts in the NFL, so I think we already know who he is. This isn't a guy with like a dozen starts like a Mason Rudolph or 16 games played like a Dwayne Haskins. If you draft, let's say you draft Kenny Pickett this year. This is the point I really want to drive home. You draft Kenny Pickett, you let him play 14 games, and he has more interceptions than touchdowns, His completion percentage floats around 60, 61%. Are people going to be asking to get the next guy next year, or are you going to be patient with him? I just think there wasn't any patience because, number one, you know who Ben Roethlisberger is, and you want to win now. This is the window for the Steelers to win, especially with the good defense. I see these arguments from Mitchell Trubisky. And, this is a tough one. 10 games, gets sacked like 18 times. It didn't take necessarily the most. 38, 15 games, I'd say that's about where you're usually at. 17 touchdowns to 10 interceptions next to last year with the Bears. Throws for 3,100 yards, 2,000 yards in 10 games on about 300 attempts. 16 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. You double that up and it's 32 to 16. I see some arguments for him. I saw him play with the Bears, and you talk about, you go back to 2019, I mentioned Randy Fichtner, dink and dunk. I'm talking about the Steelers not pushing the ball downfield with Matt Canada. I don't think Mitch Trubisky is a push the ball downfield guy. Don't forget he had Allen Robinson. I think Darnell Mooney was still there. He had Tariq Cohen. I mentioned some of these players before. Matt Nagy, again. You got all of these things that are in place, and he didn't necessarily have the biggest amount of success. I hear Jameis Winston's name thrown around quite a bit, and he was under a very cheap contract. I mean, he was the only guy in the 30 for 30 club in NFL history as far as quarterbacks are concerned, throwing 30 touchdowns and 30 interceptions. I was a very strong opponent 2 seasons ago, and he became a free agent and ended up playing with he didn't really play with the Saints too much in 2020, but of course Drew Brees retired, and he got his shot this past season. He hits 59% completion percentage. Now, granted, he still didn't have Michael Thomas, but you still have some of the dudes that are there. But 14 TDs to 3 interceptions is a marked improvement with Sean Payton as his coach. Now Sean Payton not being there, what did the Saints do? Are you going to go with Taysom Hill? Are you looking to draft somebody? They drafted Ian Book. They didn't want to play him. Another one of these mid-round values, right? I gotta like just twist the knife on some of these names that show up during the draft season. So you got a guy that's a veteran. He started 77 games in his career. In lifetime, he's a little over 60-some%. He's had 135 touchdowns to 91 interceptions. And in Tampa, 121 to 88. Now, you saw what happened when Tom Brady jumped in there. And they have Mike Evans. They have Chris Godwin. They have Rojo in the backfield, even though, I don't know, I think his ship sailed. Bruce Arians doesn't like him for some reason. But they go and they draft O.J. Howard. They have 2 good tight ends, Cameron Brate. They end up adding Gronk to that. But how much more was added to that team where the offense was killing that great defense that the Buccaneers had? You bring in Tom Brady, and it's night and day. It just says to me how much of an improvement that he was over. Of course, he's going to be called the GOAT forever, as much as that makes me want to vomit in my mouth. Does Jameis Winston offer you how much of an upgrade? See, this is my problem. I kind of think I know. I know where the ceiling and floor is on a lot of these players, or so I have a feeling. And I don't know that their ceiling is over a dozen games each on a Rudolph or Haskins where you don't know where their ceiling is. You probably know where their floor is. And the floor could fall out too. The foundation could completely go. But are these players necessarily an upgrade? And some of the guys, like I said, Aaron Rodgers isn't necessarily available. Russell Wilson isn't necessarily available. Those are upgrades. That's different. Jimmy G, I'm not feeling it. You got to still trade for him. Kirk Cousins isn't a free agent. Derek Carr isn't a free agent. None of these guys are really free agents. Somebody said Gardner Minshew. Gardner Minshew is like, I want to say that Duck Hodges is the great value brand. Gardner Minshew. Maybe we do it in reverse than what I usually say. There isn't much there. The kid backing up Lamar Jackson, Tyler Huntley, undrafted. He didn't have the nicest numbers when you end up looking at it over the course of the season. He did admirable for coming in and being a backup. You see what the Steelers did to him, 16 to 31, 51% completed, 141 yards, 2 picks. This is the stuff that ended up happening with Duck Hodges. You look over the course of the season, and he has about 1,000 yards. He has 3 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. He got sacked 18 times he had 4 starts, 7 appearances, 18 times. But he's mobile. Maybe some of that lends to it. If they're like real short and it's design run and he's line of scrimmage, gets called like that. Doesn't ever get called like that to give TJ the sack record though. I find a lot of these things, and he fumbled 4 times. There's not enough of a window there. Like I said, this isn't a 40, 50 starts where you absolutely know where he is. He's a young guy, but he's an exclusive rights free agent. The Ravens aren't trading within the division for him. So, while I'm trying to also back up some of the things I said before, I haven't even seen that start to nudge up. In this offense, in the way that Greg Roman and they run the ball, he's a fit there. You put him over with the Steelers and what they did, you complain about Randy Fichtner and Matt Canada, and you want a guy like this, or Gardner Minshew, or Nick Foles. Deshaun Watson would be an upgrade. I don't want to pay him. That contract is ludicrous. The Texans would have to eat all of that. In order to eat all of that, they're going to want an awful lot of compensation in order for that to happen. So I think that the Steelers, myself, I haven't given all of the perfect arguments yet because I don't want the show to drone on much longer. There's a lot of scattered thoughts on quarterbacks here. I'm still not really talking about guys that are going in the draft. I'm still I'm looking at the free agent class, and everybody says get a veteran quarterback, and they're not necessarily an upgrade. You're doing a lateral transition and paying more money for someone. I think the season overall, you could agree. If you can agree that the Steelers were in it in 2019 because of their defense, can we agree if we have a healthy Mason Rudolph? Let's say he fails. Dwayne Haskins comes in, he fails. The Steelers will have a bad record. They're going to be in a better position to draft next year where you have a better quarterback class. You don't have all these question marks on all these guys that are coming out. And that might be the way to go. And then maybe you're still rolling with them for another season. So you have an average season of Mason Rudolph. Dwayne Haskins doesn't see the field. You're going to bring him back. You're going to draft somebody in 2023 because now Mason's going to be on the hot seat. You got to be better than Tommy Maddox or else Ben's coming. That's the train of thought I want people to get on. And I also want to see Mason Rudolph succeed and not necessarily have J.C. Hassenauer or John LeGlue or who else was on that offensive line. We saw the offensive line. Kendrick Green, actually not even Hassenauer unless he came in at guard. I don't think he did. I think Haig did against the Lions. And so the reason people are upset is really, you look at that game. I mentioned Connor and Juju fumbling before. You had Freiermuth and Johnson fumbling and Green snapping over his head. You forget when they played the Browns, Week 17. They lose to the Browns back-to-back games. Oh, it's because of Mason Rudolph. Because, T.J. Watt and Cam Hayward didn't play. Pouncey didn't play in that game, which probably led to his jitters or whatever in the wild card game and the bad snaps. But the bad snaps, how many times did you see Rudolph put his hand up in that Lions game? And like I said, Johnson fumbles, Freiermuth fumbles, and we blame the quarterback there. And I don't think he necessarily had a bad game. If he can have those type of games and the Steelers don't turn over the ball and they have the defensive output, and people will say too, well, if they wouldn't have played the Lions, maybe they'd get blown out in that game or something. Yeah, because the defense look at the runs they gave up to, I don't even know the names of the running backs. Yeah, they had Swift. I can't remember the other guy's name. I think it was his first rushing touchdown or something ever as a pro. So, I see some of this tongue-in-cheek, but I just try to get the thought process going of, would you prefer to pick a player that sits on the bench or sign someone that isn't a necessarily upgrade, and then you cannot supplement these other areas of need through free agency because you don't have money or you don't have a first-round pick? I think the whole offensive line doesn't have to be first-round picks. Alejandro Villanueva was undrafted. Ramon Foster was undrafted. But you got to have some guys with pedigree. Marcus Gilbert was even a second-round pick. DeCastro and Pouncey were first-round picks. Pouncey, where was he at? They were in the middle of those drafts, probably about, like 16, 18, 20-ish for DeCastro. DeCastro fell right into their lap when they couldn't say no. And look, he was an elite player for a long time. I would like to have an elite player. And if that means admitting that Kendrick Green, a third-round pick, are you going to say it's a mistake? They had the best of intentions because a third-round pick, you're starting down here and you're working your way up. If he never works his way up, he's not really a bust to me. It just didn't work out. If you kick a guy in the first round and then they end up down here where Green is currently, you got a little bit more of a problem. we could fix the problem. Maybe in the draft, maybe you get somebody as a free agent. You get 2 or 3 of these pieces and mix in with the experienced pieces they already have. And then this line will be better for Najee Harris. They could lean on running the ball. Maybe they don't have to ask Rudolph to pass 50 times in a game, which I think is also part of the problem as well. And maybe those guys succeed. If they succeed, then you don't have to burn a draft pick the following year. You may still. Maybe Mason's ceiling is just middle. Maybe Mason's ceiling is Jimmy Garoppolo. And then they're looking for a Trey Lance to replace him. And we'll see how that works out in San Francisco. But that could be the Steelers' mindset. I think it most likely is, at least from Kevin Colbert. We'll see how it ends up, if there's any philosophy changes when there's a new general manager. But I think that's what they're setting up for. And in my opinion, that's going to be competitive. I know that some of these teams dealt with injuries in the AFC North, but the Steelers, considering how bad we think they are, and how bad we thought they played, still swept the Browns and still swept the Ravens and still made the postseason. Just think about it. Anything that they do, for the most part this offseason, I'm coming from a point of you're improving the entire team. Then you might only need one piece in the future, and that piece may be the quarterback. But why jump the gun on that and not put the other parts around that quarterback in order to help them succeed? And that includes Rudolph, that includes Haskins, that includes for a free agent, et cetera, et cetera. The free agent's going to have to be cheap, in my opinion, or you're not going to be able to improve those spots. Rodgers, Wilson, Watson, those names, you've just set yourself up for the 2021 season, swapping Ben out with Aaron Rodgers. That's not going to work. Aaron Rodgers doesn't turn the ball over very much. He will, if you have to have him with Kendrick Green maybe as his center, and like your 4th or 5th left guard coming off the bench. So, folks, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for putting up with my rants, trying to get you 2 shows a week. Sorry if some of it's a little ad nauseum or repeat or beating a dead horse. I'm going to try and get into free agents, and then we're going to get into the positions where I'm going to be talking about quarterback again. But I'm going to try and stay away from the free agents. I'm going to try and stay away from all the young guys. People want to hear about the Senior Bowl guys, this and that. We still got the Combine that's coming up. Then free agency. Then we're going to see where the Steelers have actual needs in the draft. Free agency always kind of sets them up for that position. And in most cases, let's just say they sign a tackle, an offensive tackle. They're going to draft one too. That's usually, they'll double down. They've done it for many years. We've seen it happen with some of the more. I thought of Lance Moore immediately off the top of my head saying that. But like the year they signed him as a wide receiver, I forget, they drafted someone else. Might have been Bryant, actually, thinking that far back. But just most recently, when they needed a safety, they signed Morgan Burnett, and then they drafted Terrell Edmonds. And then Burnett couldn't stay healthy, and that's the reason why Edmonds ended up getting put in there early as a rookie, and maybe not when he was prepared. And a lot of Yins have the opinion that you do about him. So more food for thought. Always food for thought. I try and have the steel trap of a memory. We'll see if it ends up working. Look forward, as always, to some of your comments. Didn't get to as many of them as I would have liked to today, but keep them coming. We appreciate it. We appreciate your support here at Steel City Underground. My name is Joe Kuzma, and as always, until next time, we encourage everyone out there to be safe, be good, and we'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.